So for today's session, this is brought to you by the Association of CNPs. This is the professional organization of certified nonprofit professionals. So one way that the association supports its membership is by hosting sessions on topics that are on our minds, like this one. And so these events are always free, always free. If you would like to support the Alliance, we would love for you to donate to support so that we can keep these events free. And you'll also find a link in the chat so that you can donate in that way. And without further delay, today's speaker is Chris Wong. We'll be diving into mastering difficult conversations. A little bit about Chris. He's an executive coach, consultant, therapist at Leadership Potential, who works with new purpose-driven leaders to navigate chaotic and turbulent transitions. And he also brings years of experience navigating nonprofit, health insurance, and government systems. And so without further delay, I am going to spotlight Chris so that we can all see him. And then Chris will take it away. There you go, Chris.
Awesome. Thank you. Good to be here. And while I get started, I'm going to put a question here in the chat, and you can put the answer in the chat while I share the story. But I'd love to hear, are you here to learn? Are you here to get unstuck with a specific situation? Or you just want to see how others approach this? So while you put that in the chat, I want to share a story about a few months ago. I was driving my mom to lunch, and during the car ride, she told me that she bought me this air fryer, and it's the exact same air fryer I have. Mine works just fine, no issue. And so I told her, actually, I don't need one. I have the same exact one. I don't need a new one. She got so angry at me. She started yelling at me, saying that I was disrespectful, I was ungrateful, and that that she had done this really great thing for me. And why would I push back and say this and not care about this? And so all of it, she was just yelling at me. And so as I'm sharing this, I'm willing to bet some of you have a similar relationship or a similar experience. You can talk about this with with one of your parents as well. My response, so it'd be interesting to see how you all responded, but my response in the moment was to say nothing. I actually purposely didn't say anything because where I was driving her from was we were coming from my grandmother's funeral, so her mom's funeral. And so I knew, and she knew she was in a tough space. She was in a very vulnerable, emotional space. And I knew that. So I knew that there was nothing I could say in response to that would have been helpful in that situation. She was just upset about what was going on. And so this is the reality of difficult conversations in general, is that we are coming to them from our own perspective. The other people are coming to it from their own perspective. And difficult conversations are just difficult for everyone. They're hard because otherwise they would be called difficult conversations. And this is one of my favorite quotes that I've heard about this, is that the more we run from conflict, the more it masters us. The more we try to avoid it, the more it controls us. The less we fear conflict, the less it confuses us. The less we deny our differences, the less they divide us. So as we go through today, I want you to think about this. Yes, I will teach you ways to navigate the conversation. I'll teach you things to say, things to look out for, how to navigate and respond to difficult behaviors. But the biggest thing for you to think about is that it's real. At the end of the day, it's about controlling about ourselves, because that's the only thing we really have control over, is how do we respond and think about and be intentional in these spaces. And it's the conflict itself is so important. Conflict is what builds a relationship in the long run. And so as we think about it, is thinking about how do we actually control ourselves, and so that we go in intentionally and thinking clearly about these kind of things. And so I don't have to tell you much, because difficult conversations, they're hard for everybody, right? A lot of recent research, 70% of employees are avoiding difficult conversations in all aspects. 53% are handling toxic situations at work just by ignoring them. So half of all employees are ignoring the important conversations they should be having. And also worldwide, $2 billion are lost daily in reduced productivity and absenteeism based upon conflict. And so that's why it's important to think about, how are we leaning into these conversations? The book Courageous Conversations I wish I had thought of that title. It is about how do you be brave and lean into these conversations, right? So as we go through it, I want you to think about this. Finish the sentence in the chat. I'd consider this session a win if, and some of you already said it. Somebody wants to learn how to talk to others because thinking about tone because you're neurodivergent. Great. What would we have to do to consider this session a win? Get one new idea, learn something new. Hopefully we will get you into that. Thank you, David. Handle conflict more effectively. China, absolutely. One new strategy, Dorothy, absolutely. And that's what we're going to do. We're going to talk through, number one, why are difficult conversations so difficult? That's the number one important thing, is because you need to know what it is that's making it so hard for you specifically. Secondly, we'll talk about how to prepare the right way, because I think that's where actually people get trapped up, is they don't prepare everything the correct way. And so once you prepare, you'll feel more confident going into it. And then we'll talk about strategies and tactics. One, to how to actually navigate the conversation and facilitate the productive resolution of a conflict or a conversation, and also how to respond to difficult behaviors, because that's also important. What happens if somebody starts yelling at you? What if they start bringing up other issues that are unrelated, or you think they're unrelated? What if it starts getting too heated or something like that? We'll talk about how to navigate those and how to respond to those intentionally, as opposed to just reacting in the moment and not being able to manage it appropriately. Right. So what makes difficult conversations so difficult anyway? Here's the reality. There's 5 big things. One is fear of the unknown. It's just hard when you're worried, when you're not sure of what's going to happen next. They did a study with Navy SEALs. The most stressful time for Navy SEALs by and far were the minutes leading up to when they were going to break into a room. So if you've ever seen any kind of shows with military and law enforcement, there's always a situation where they have to go into a room and neutralize the enemy. The moments right before that are going to be by and far, by research, the most stressful time for Navy SEALs, because they could train all they want, but they don't really know what's going to happen until they get into that situation. And so that's the fear of the unknown. We all have that. We don't know what's going to happen, so we get worried about that. Second reason is we care about the relationship and the outcome. And what I mean by relationship is we care about preserving some sort of relationship, some kind of working relationship. It doesn't mean you want to be best friends with this person, especially if it's at a work situation, but you care about this relationship and you need some kind of working relationship going forward. And you care about the outcome. You want the outcome to be a specific thing. If you didn't care about the relationship, you never were going to see this person again, you just need to get the outcome, you could just say what you needed to say and you wouldn't care about what's going to happen next. Likewise, you care about if you didn't care about the outcome, you probably would just say, okay, we'll just do it your way, or we'll just do it whatever, it doesn't really matter, or I won't even have the conversation because I don't care. So you care about the relationship in some way or the outcome in some capacity. Third thing is we're human. We all have this fight, flight, or freeze response to danger. And this is evolutionary, this is biological, we're not going to get rid of it. When we feel a threat, we're going to be in fight, flight, or freeze. And if you forget everything else from this conversation today, if you could just remember that whatever they're doing to you, if they're yelling or if they're deflecting or if they're crying, whatever's going on in the situation, it all boils down to they're just in that fight, flight, or freeze response. And the more we're in that, we can't think clearly. So if you could just remember that and just realize that whatever they're doing, they are just responding emotionally and biologically, then we can just think about how do we calm them down so that they can think logically and think through the process. Also, our minds limit us. Just like the well-worn snow tracks that you see on the screen, we all have been raised to think of conflict a specific way. Whether conflict is bad, we can't talk back to people, we can't raise our voice, or we always see other people as the problem. Whatever it is, we've been raised to think a certain way. And so it just takes time because we are always going to review every situation through that lens. And so it takes time to reframe and think of these situations in a new way. And I'll give you some ideas in the next section, but it's how we think about conflict will already shape how we're approaching it. And the last thing is you might be really confident. You might be comfortable with people yelling or screaming or not having a clear resolution, you just might not have a plan, and you might not have a specific way or strategy of how to navigate and facilitate that conversation. So what we're going to do today is I'm going to go through strategies that can help mitigate all of these 5 things, is because it'll help mitigate that fear, the ambiguity of what's going to happen next. It'll give you a plan of what to do next, but also how to reframe and think about it so that it's a more productive dialogue as opposed to just a back and forth battle, back and forth with no resolution, right? So I'm curious, which of those 5 reasons describe you the most? Is it all of them? It could be all of them. It could be a combination. Or is there one in particular that stands out to you as like, oh, that's the one that hurts me the most? So take a moment. I'd love to hear what you're thinking about. Fear of the unknown. Jenny, thanks. Thanks for sharing. Yeah, it's hard because you don't know what's going to happen. You don't know what they're going to say. You don't know if you're going to get that resolution. Yeah, Ingrid, no map. Yeah, fear of the unknown. I'm seeing a lot of fear of the unknown. Absolutely. So it's absolutely. So let's talk through how you're going to prepare, because a lot of what you can do, you can mitigate a lot of stuff just by preparing the right way. And I want you to think about it this way: is football players will be in practice for 40 to 60 hours a week for essentially 1 hour of game time a week. Professional orchestra musicians, they're practicing 30 to 40 hours a week for about 6 hours worth of playing time each week. Boxers, MMA fighters, they're training for months for a 1 hour, 2 hour fight. Months. They're going through months and months of preparation, practice, training just for a 1 hour, 2 hour fight. So when you think about the way you prepare, you have to think about preparing a lot more than you think you already are. It's also preparing the right way, right? If the boxer starts practicing juggling, that's not going to help them. It's preparing the right way, but it's also spending more time preparing the way that's going to make the most help in the long run, right? So the first one is you want to be really clear about the goal. This is the part that I see trip up leaders the most, and anybody most, when they go into a conflict or difficult conversation. A lot of times people go in, they're not really clear about what their goal is. And you got to be clear, concrete about what that outcome is. It's got to be a specific thing. Do you want the other person to do something different? Do you want them to think something different? Are you trying to persuade them? Do you want to just vent at them? Are you just going to yell at them? Because that's fine if you want to do that, but just know that that's a goal by itself. You're not going to yell at them and change their mind. Those are 2 different goals. But what do you want to have happen as a result of this meeting? It could just be, I need to tell you something, right? Something, if you're giving somebody a performance evaluation like a PIP or you need to lay them off, that's the outcome. You need to lay them off. You need to deliver this. You having them be happy about it is not the right goal of that situation. And it may not even be reasonable, right? Like, I've been laid off. I've been fired. I don't know what anybody could have said to make me feel happy about that conversation, right? There's nothing that you can say to help have people feel happy about certain situations. So what is the end goal you actually need out of that? And it needs to be concrete. I've had managers been able to navigate performance conversations just by having a goal written on a piece of paper when they go into that conversation. They write it down, and then when somebody tries to go off track, they say, actually, we'll talk about that later. We need to talk about this first. So that's the number one thing, is if you can figure out what your goal is of the conversation, you can head off a lot of problems ahead of time, right? Second is thinking about your emotions, and I don't know how much you care about doing this internal work and working on your own emotions. I do think it's super important, and I'm a therapist, and so this is just something that I believe in, but it is important to think about, what are your triggers? What are your trigger points of what gets you upset, what gets you unable to focus, what gets your fight, flight, or freeze response going? For me, I can have somebody yell at me. If we were in a conversation, you yelled at me, you started swearing at me, that's not going to throw me off the game. I'm used to it by this point. I can handle it. I can refocus on what I need to do to focus and bring everything down so we can be balanced, right? But that might not be you. That might be a hard boundary for you. And if that is, that's okay. Think about what you'll do in the situation to stay focused, and then think about is that a boundary for you? Do you need to set that as, oh, well, we're not going to continue this conversation if you're going to be yelling, we're going to take a break. Likewise, if somebody's crying, maybe that's the situation, right? So that's the thing about emotions, is thinking about what do you need to do to stay focused in the conversation, right? Then you want to game plan the logistics. You want to gather necessary information, especially if it is a performance evaluation. You want to be specific with hard data. If somebody's not coming into work, if they're missing important deadlines or whatever, you got to have that data. It can't just be you noticed, right? It can't just be subjective. Otherwise, they'll be able to wriggle out of that. They'll be able to push back, and you won't be able to stand your ground. So having that necessary information is really helpful to just have a baseline, a foundation of what you're talking about. You want to think about the power dynamics and take that into play, right? And in the work situation, we always think about a hierarchy, right? Like a boss or a manager or an executive. But I always also think about the unspoken dynamics, power dynamics. So I'm thinking about race, age, gender, all of those play a role. I was just talking to somebody who's a associate professor. He's a white older man, and his associate dean is a shorter, middle-aged Middle Eastern woman. And so that plays a role, right? Even though she's in a position of authority, the age is going to play a role, the height's going to play a role, the gender and the ethnicity and the race, all of that plays a role in how both people are viewing the conversation, viewing this situation. So you want to understand, how do those dynamics play a role? How are all of these spoken and unspoken things showing up for both of you? In terms of a script, I always think a script is helpful, especially if it's going to be more contentious. You want to write down, you don't have to write down necessarily specifically what you're going to say, but you might want to write down what are the key points you want to hit, any data, any specific wording you want to say, and be clear about what that script is. And then what are your own boundaries? What's the line in the sand for you? What is the point where you're going to say, actually, we need to stop now. We're not going to have this conversation because things are getting out of control, or we're both getting too heated. Let's just relax. Let's come back. Let's take a 10-minute break. Let's come back when we both can focus. It's okay to have those boundaries, and it's okay to respect other people's boundaries, right? Just because you have to have this conversation if you're the manager or the leader doesn't mean that your boundaries don't matter, right? Your boundaries matter too. You're a person as well. You have worth. And it's important to think about how you're going to show up for yourself so that you can be in this conversation, right? And again, the anger and yelling is the example I go to, because it happens to me all the time. People yell at me or are angry at me. That's okay. I can manage that. Be respectful of yourself. Think about what your own boundaries are, and it's okay to have those boundaries, and think about what you're going to do to manage when the situation gets tough, right? The last thing I'll talk about in terms of practicing and preparing is rehearse and role play. I know that role play tends to be real hard language for people. It brings up a lot of emotions about you don't want to put yourself out there. I think it's one of the most effective things you can do, is because you need to say it out loud in order to hear how it's going to sound. Just thinking about it is fine to get the brainstorming and get those initial thoughts out. But once you say it out loud, it hits your brain a different way. Once you hear the words out loud, it gets processed in a different part of your brain. And suddenly the words or the language that sounded okay to you in your head, you say it out loud and you're like, oh, wait, that's not how that's not how I want it to come out. The tone's not going to be right. The wording's not right. I need to think about this more. So find somebody you can practice with. Find the colleague, find the friend, the family member, somebody that you can practice with. And I always advise everybody, take a minute when you go into the role play, tell them how you want them to be, how hard you want them to push back. Take a minute and just say what you really want to say. Feel free to vent for a minute or two, but no more than 2 minutes. But vent what you really want to say. Say you think they're a jerk, you think they're being unreasonable, whatever. You can swear if you want to, but I do think it's worth having that release valve and letting yourself out and saying what you really believe, and that's okay. Say what you need to say, and then go into the role play. And you'll find that you will be able to you'll be able to feel less pressure to say certain things. So think about rehearsing, think about role play, think about if you're worried about certain things happening, whether you think that you're going to say things in a weird way, practice with somebody, have them give you that feedback. How does it sound? How does it come back out, right? I can never say the phrase "help me understand," because if I try to say it in a real high stakes conversation, my tone makes it sound condescending. I just can't say it in a very caring, empathic way. Some people can. I know lots of people that can say, "Help me understand how you got to this or how you got to that." They say it, and it doesn't bother me at all. It sounds like super caring and empathic, and they're just curious. You want to be mindful of your own style, and rehearsal and role play can get you to do that part really well. So think about how you can practice and role play this. So, are there any questions so far? If you want to put in the chat that you want to talk about, I certainly understand when there was a conversation about the stereotype that women are accused of being too emotional. It is a hard stereotype to break, especially if the other person across the way is somebody that believes that, right? It's hard. I coached a black female leader who had to also deal with that and also being a black woman in leadership, and how much she was able to speak her mind and how much she had to tone down. And it was a very stressful balance for her. So, but I'll give a second if there's any questions. I'd love to answer any questions. I'm noticing my chat is a little delayed, so I'm sorry if I'm not getting to your questions right away. Yeah, neurodiversity plays a big role. Yeah, tone, body language don't come naturally. It's hard. I will say, in terms of body language, I don't cover this later on, but I will say that body language is so complicated, it's so hard, and it can be misunderstood by everybody, right? Even things where there's a common belief that if somebody has their arms crossed, I don't know if I show you, but if they have their arms crossed, it's like they're blocked off to whatever you're saying, they're closed off. But if you were to see me just standing on the street or just waiting for something, you'd see I just have my arms crossed because that's just a natural rest position for me. I don't know what else to do with my hands, especially if we were live in person. You'd see me cross my hands a lot because I just don't know what to do with my hands. And so it's easily misunderstood, even in lots of different situations. So I saw a question here: managing up and getting your goals met with someone in charge. Yeah, I think when you're managing up, you're really thinking about what their needs are and how do you understand basically their needs? What are they looking for? What is their style? What's their processing style? So that you can figure out kind of what are they looking for in a conversation, and then what do they need, and then how do they receive that information the best, right? It's not easy. It's still stressful, but the more you understand about who they are as a person, the easier it is. And I actually have a worksheet that I can give to everybody here on how to understand other people better, if you want to do that. So I know there's some other questions. I'll come back to them because I just want to make sure I get through everything. I don't want to be rushing at the end. So let's talk about now. You're in the conversation. How do you navigate and move through the conversation, right? This is what I think about. Being heard is so close to being loved that for the average person, they're almost indistinguishable. What I mean by is this. In hard conversations, in difficult conversations, you should think about one of your goals is to have the other person feel heard and understood. This is a universal human condition. We want to be loved. We want to be seen. We want to be heard. We want to be understood. The more you can do that, the more you can have the other person feel like they're being heard, the more that the less resistance you'll get because they'll feel like you care about them. And then we can move through the conversation. So as we talk about all these things, these are all active listening skills that you've probably learned in countless communication trainings, leadership trainings, over and over again. You've probably learned all these things. The goal is you're not using these. There's only one here that you're going to use intentionally, and I'll tell you about which one that is later. All of these are with the goal of how do you understand the other person better. So things like reflection. You're giving somebody a performance management conversation or a coaching conversation, and they start being stressed out. You can just reflect what you think is going on. Like, it sounds like you're worried about your job, or you can even take out it sounds like. You can say you're worried about your job. The point isn't that you're going to get it right. If you get it right, that's fantastic, right? The point is you're trying to figure out what's being said, not said, what's underneath the surface, and bringing it to the light. So they're yelling at you or they're yelling this. There's got to be something going on underneath the surface that they're really concerned about or frustrated about or worried about. You're bringing that to the light. And I say it doesn't actually even matter if you get this right or not. What you're trying to do is you're trying to get more information. Because if you say, it sounds like you're worried about your job, and they're going to say, no, I'm not worried about my job at all. I'm confident I can get another job if I need to. I'm just sick of being treated unfairly. That's the good thing. You've gotten now good information about what they really care about, being treated fairly. And so reflections, it doesn't even really matter if you get it right. If you always get it right, then yeah, that's a problem. Then you're not listening. But if you get a few wrong, it's not a big deal. It's because they will give you more information. And that's what you're really looking for, is more information. Same thing with good questions. When you ask a good question, you're not asking why questions, like why is this happening or why are you doing this, why are you doing that? Why questions sound like you're interrogating them, like they're going to feel defensive right away, right? You don't want to ask questions in a way that, bring up their defensiveness, but kick up that fight, flight, or freeze. You're trying to ask questions that are opening up, that they're going to share more information, right? You're not trying to give them hidden suggestions as a question. Have you tried this? Have you considered this? Have you thought about this? Those aren't questions. Those are suggestions. You're just disguising them, and they can figure that out, and they're going to get defensive. You're not trying to lead the witness, right? There's an idea of Socratic reasoning where you're trying to lead them to a conclusion that you have. Great for teaching. If we were in a classroom setting, I can use this and it's okay. But it's not great for a hard conversation because they can sense that right away. They're going to sense that you want them to answer a very specific way, and they're going to suss that out, and they're going to be more defensive. Likewise, you don't want to ask multiple questions. The more questions you ask, the more they're going to get confused with which question to answer. At the end of the day, you want to ask one question at a time. You want to give them the time to answer, and you want to ask permission, essentially, right? You want to be able to. Asking permission is one of the coolest things you can do to help them feel empowered, especially if you are in a position of power. The more you can ask permission to move on in the conversation, to share your idea, to even reflect like, hey, I'm noticing something. Can I share what I'm observing? The more you can ask permission, the more you are giving them power in the conversation, the less they feel powerless, and the less they feel like they have to be defensive in the conversation. A lot of it is how do you help them be part of the conversation, and how do you just be genuinely asking questions so that's curious, right? So it's thinking about how do you ask good questions, right? This is the part where I actually will say this is one where you can be really intentional and you can actually be very guided in the way you're doing this conversation. So when you are summarizing, you're just really just summarizing everything that we talked about, everything you talked about in the conversation. Here's the thing. You can actually pick and choose what makes the most sense and aligns with your narrative. You don't have to be a note taker and do an entire recapping of everything we talked about. This is where you can choose and pick and then choose things that move the conversation forward in the way you want to. So for the basic structure is, let me summarize to make sure I have everything right so far. We started by sharing blah, blah, blah. And then you talked about this, this, and that. You're talking about things they talked about. And you also feel that blah, blah, blah. And you agree there must be a better way for us to work through this. Those last two sentences, you must feel that, you also feel that blah, blah, blah. And you agree that there must be a better way to work through this. That's your opportunity to actually guide the conversation forward, because you're ending with statements that align with what you are trying to do, right? It doesn't have to be a lot of sentences. It could just be one or two things that they've said throughout the conversation or things that they're implying that agree with your way. And you're just ending with that. And that is the one of the few times where you can be very deliberate and intentional about focus on that, right? So it's that process of being able to guide the conversation. Sorry, I saw a question about leading the witness. Yeah, So leading the witness is something like it's basically Socratic reasoning, right? It's the asking questions in a very specific format to get you to think the way I want you to think. And it's a very logic-induced way that's very good for teaching. Like you want to teach somebody a concept or a way of doing things, so you're asking questions in a way. If you listen to debates, like especially political debates, a lot of people are trying to ask questions in a very Socratic way, leading the witness. They're trying to get you to answer in a very specific way. And again, it's good in a teaching format, but when you listen to a debate and you can think about, like, are they asking a question with it's going to be curious and open-minded, or are you asking a question has a very specific answer that you're looking for? It's very obvious and it's very frustrating, right? Like when you listen to especially political debates, it gets very frustrating because you're asking a question in a way that's very biased and very uh, obviously wanting a very specific answer. And so in these kind of conversations, you don't want to do that. You want to ask questions that are in a very open, honest way that you are just allowing the answer to be whatever it is, right? And that's the hard part a lot of times. And then I want you to think about silence, using silence, right? I want you to think about being quiet, not saying something. A lot of times that's hard for people, but the more you can be silent, the more you can just let the other person sit with what they're thinking about. And then last thing about these things I'll share is bat. I want you to think about the first thing that comes to mind when you hear the word bat or see the word bat on screen. Some of you are probably thinking baseball, maybe you're thinking cricket, maybe you're thinking the animal. This is the reality, is that you can be thinking, having the same word, and we could all be thinking about something different, even in a common word like bat. And so when you're in difficult conversations, you want to make sure you're talking about the same thing. Even simple words, even words that you assume that everybody means the same thing, right? I had somebody, a consultant, talk to me saying that, hey, I'm not calling people enough. And I was like, you know what? You're probably right. I don't call people enough because I just don't like calling, potential clients or leads. I'm not great on the phone, or I just don't like talking on the phone very much. It was only afterwards that I realized, oh, he didn't mean call in the literal sense. He was meaning I'm not reaching out to people, which I am. I do that all the time, right? But a simple word like call, to me, I thought of a very specific definition of calling on the phone. And even, in fact, I was actually thinking of like a landline. I don't even know why I was thinking about that, but I was thinking of a landline phone. But he was talking about all types of calls, right? Another situation, I got into a debate with a friend about privilege, and we went to a long debate about privilege, and at the end we actually agreed, and because we realized that I was talking about racial privilege and white privilege, and he was like, oh yeah, he's white, and he's like, oh yeah, obviously white privilege exists. But he was talking about about socioeconomic privilege and how he didn't have any because he grew up in a rural poor area, which he was right. I agree. Socioeconomic privilege is a real thing. So make sure you're talking about the same thing in hard conversations when the stakes are high, because they bring up different things for different people and you feel different ways about different people, right? So, and then I think I want to give you this agenda. And so I'm going to walk through this pretty quickly because I just want to be thoughtful about time. But I want you to think about using an agenda in hard conversations, because this is how you're actually going to structure a conversation. And you can take things out, you can move things around. You don't have to necessarily follow, but the same idea applies, right? When you start the conversation, they always starts with anchoring and setting the tone. How you start the conversation will set the tone for the entire rest of the conversation. So you want to think about thanking them for agreeing to meet with you, talk with you. Thanking somebody implies that they had a choice in the conversation. Even if you are in HR, even if you're a manager, if you think it's a performance evaluation, it doesn't matter. Everybody does have a choice to be in the conversation unless you tied them up and forced them to be in the conversation. Outside of that, they had a choice. And so you want to think about empowering them right away. By thanking them, you are implying to them they have a choice, and they automatically will feel more in control, right? As opposed to that they had no choice, this is being done to them. So thanking them, starting with gratitude right away. Then you want to be very specific. I wanted to talk about our work dynamic or whatever situation is. You want to be very specific right away. What do you want to talk about? Because I'm sure some of you feel like this, but whenever a boss says to me, Chris, we need to talk, I automatically think I'm going to get fired, even if we're not a boss, even if you're not my boss, even if you're somebody else. If anybody in this webinar were to email me and say, Chris, we need to talk, I would immediately think I'm getting fired, even though I don't work for you. So you want to reduce that ambiguity, reduce that anxiety right away. Say exactly what you want to talk about. I need to give you feedback about your performance. I want to give you feedback on that meeting. Just say it, reduce that anxiety. Tell people what you want to talk about. The other thing I want you to think about is using the word and as much as possible. I'm not a racist, but I'm not a sexist, but when you use those words, you automatically associate everything after that is the opposite of what I said before that. It discounts everything that's said before that, right? And doesn't have that effect. And is a subtle implication that both sides are true. So the more you could say and, it makes it better. It makes it more palatable, right? So especially if you are saying, I understand you're going through a lot of stuff. I understand you have a lot of stressors going on in your family, making it hard for you to get to work and show up on time. And I want to also make sure we talk about how we're going to work together on that. Right? That sounds a lot more understanding than but. Right? Even if they're not going to say anything, it's subconscious. They're going to automatically think about one way or the other, depending on whether you use and or but. Then you want to use the word we as much as possible. I talked about reframes. A lot of times we go into conflict saying the other person is the problem. It's how do you reframe it so that the other person isn't the problem is the problem. How do we work together to solve this problem together? The other person isn't necessarily the problem. It's the behavior that's the problem, or it's the lateness that's the problem, or it's this conflict that's the problem. How do you work together to think about that, right? Then you want to make sure you set ground rules. That's the next step. You start strong, you set ground rules first. I hope we can talk openly and honestly today. You set whatever ground rules you want. That way you can come back to this later. When we talk about responding to difficult behaviors, that's actually a lot of it is how do you set ground rules at the beginning so that you can come back and say, hey, I noticed you're talking about another person. I noticed you're bringing up this other issue. And at the beginning, we agreed that we would talk about just this performance right here. So it's one of those things where you can bring it back and say, hey, we talked about this. We agreed on this at the beginning. And that's how that asking permission works, right? You're asking, how does that sound? Do you agree with this? You're getting their buy-in now. You're creating this agreement at the beginning. If they don't agree to it, that means you're still stuck at setting these ground rules. You're never going to get through the rest of the conversation if they can't even agree to, hey, we're going to be respectful of one another. And this is what respect looks like. If they can't agree to that, you're going to have a lot harder time getting through the rest of the conversation, right? So make sure you spend time on this if you need to. It can be as simple as just a few sentences and you all agree. If it's high stakes, you might want to really sit down and talk through, hey, what are the ground rules that are going to help you feel comfortable in this conversation? These are the ground rules I have. So you want to talk through all of that stuff. Then after that is if you need to give feedback, whatever it may be, do that, but you want to explore their needs and priorities. You want to spend a lot of time exploring what's going on for you. What led you to do this? Help me understand what's important for you about. And like I said before, a lot of it is also dependent on your personality and your style. Like I said, I can never use help me understand because it sounds condescending if I say it. I can't use it. I could say what's going on for you, what was important for you, what happened here. I can use those really well. I can just ask questions and be thoughtful and be curious. But at the end of the day, you want to think about what are the questions or things you have that are going to help you understand what happens, understand what's going on for them, understand what they need in the situation, understand their priorities for this, right? Then once you have done that, then you can talk about sharing your priorities and needs. Here's my main priority. I need you to be into work on time, or I need this report done, or I need this done on time, or I need this kind of behavior in this meeting, right? This respectful behavior. That's how you start talking through your priorities and needs, and it doesn't need to be very long. It's just one sentence or two, right? Then from there, you're finding a shared solution. You're saying, hey, what's the solution that works best for both of our needs? Very straightforward. And then you're just talking about that. You're ending on next steps and gratitude. That's all it really is at the end, is thinking through, thank you, I appreciate you being here, acknowledging that it was hard for them too. It's not easy. It's hard for them too, and thinking about where they're going to go next and coming up with action plans together. And so that's how you want to think about ending, and acknowledging that it was hard for them as well. And so I have a whole lot more stuff on responding to difficult behaviors, but I want to leave time for some questions. So I want to make sure that in the handouts, there are some additional slides around how do you respond to difficult behaviors in these hard conversations. So I want you to think about that, look at that. And then also there's some resources around difficult conversations, like books and podcasts and things like that. I'll leave my information up here, and you can scan that QR code to give me feedback. But I'll leave this up while I answer some questions, because I want to make sure I get some of your questions around difficult conversations.
Thank you, Chris. This was really, really great. The chat was very engaged during this time. Thank you again. I would love to shift to asking some questions. We have some in our Q&A section. Feel free, if you all have any additional questions, to add them there. We'll get through as much as we can. So the first question that we have, I'll start from the bottom. Do you have any advice on having these conversations with individuals who lack self-awareness?
Yeah, I think it's the question I would think about is, what do you want as a result of this, right? Do you want them to, and I mean being super concrete, does that mean they don't smell great in the office or the shared space? Do they constantly talk too loud, all right? Or do they constantly talk over other people in meetings? The more concrete you can be, the less pressure it takes to sounding like it's a personal judgment about their style or who they are as a person. And the more you can say, hey, I just need you to not interrupt people in these meetings. That's it. I just need you to give space for other people to talk, and then we can work on that. So the self-awareness is so vague, and it can be interpreted so many different ways by people. It makes it so much easier if you could be really concrete and specific with what behaviors you're trying to change or improve on.
Got it. That's really good. Being clear can be very helpful. Okay. Yeah. All right. Another question we have is, can you share an experience where a difficult conversation went well and what made it successful for you?
Yeah, I had to talk with when I was the chair of a board of directors. I had to talk with one of the other board members who was posting a lot of inappropriate things on social media, and it was really hurting our mission of our organization. So I had to talk with him, and he actually felt no shame or regret about it at all. He was like, "No, I feel this is what I stand up for," and it was very politically charged. He's like, "This is what I believe. This is what I need to stand up for. You know, we need to be standing up for justice. So I need to say what I need to say." So what made it successful was not that he agreed to take it down. What made it successful was that I learned more about what made him tick, is that he ended up saying, hey, listen, I'm having a hard time. This is during the pandemic. He's like, I'm having a hard time. He actually expressed having suicidal thoughts. And so he was just having a struggle. He was just struggling. And so that was what made it successful, is that we got to a point where I understood, okay, what's happening is he's having a really hard time. And he actually ended up needing to step down from the board. But if I had just argued about what's appropriate to post on social media or not, we could have kept going around in circles, because it didn't even matter if I agreed or disagreed. It's that he was so stuck in that he would have never changed his opinion. But what happened was that I understood deeper what was bothering him, and we could approach that, and he was easily willing to solve that, like that, the suicidal thoughts and the feeling alone and the mental health difficulties. But the posting, he was never going to change his mind about like what he needed to post online.
Got it. Thank you for sharing that. Another question that we have, we may have time for maybe 2 or 3 more. Do you recommend a follow-up email to summarize the conversation that you have with people and ensure you're both on the same page?
Yes. The 5 most important things you can do as a manager: document, 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 and document. If you don't write it down, if you didn't document it, it didn't happen. And you could think about whatever way makes the most sense for you and your employee, right? Or the other person you're talking to. You could say it's just for my edification. You could put the pressure on yourself. You don't have to call them out saying you don't trust in them. You just want a paper record, whatever it might be. Document it however you need to. Send an email. Make sure you're on the same page. And you could also leave it open. Say, hey, is there anything on here that I got wrong? Is there anything here that should be changed or that I missed? And you want to make sure you get it right. But yes, please email and document everything.
That is good. Thank you. So I'm getting down to maybe our final 2 questions. In line with what you were saying, in line with you saying you cannot say, can you help me understand, without sounding condescending, this person often thinks that saying, I'm hearing you say, can come across that way as well. So how do you get the same thing in a different way?
Yeah, I'm hearing you say one thing you could say. I've never used that phrasing before. I've heard other people use it. I think it sounds fine. I think you could say it sounds. What I'm hearing is this. Do I have that right? You can just offer it as a your what you're hearing, and then does that sound right? Am I off base? What's right or wrong about that?
Okay. And how do you take care of yourself after having difficult conversations?
I mean, mindfulness is a huge thing. If you can do that, grounding, go for a walk, whatever helps you, right? If you know you're having a difficult conversation, go do what you got to do to take care of yourself, right? Go for a walk, talk to a friend, get a drink if that's what you do. I like when I got laid off, I went to the beach and took a walk on the beach for like an hour. That was me, right? But for other people, it depends. If I have this is not difficult, same as difficult conversations, but I'll tell you this: when I have a day of therapy, when I'm doing therapy and I have like 4 or 5 clients in a day, I just sit down and lay down on the couch and just like I don't have any TV on. I just like sit and stare into the void because I need to like my brain needs time to decompress. And maybe that's you. Maybe you need time to just decompress. But I say take care of yourself however you need to, right? And I used to listen to podcasts because I had a long commute, and so I do that sometimes when I have these hard conversations. But it looks different for everybody. Whatever brings you joy, whatever helps you unwind, and whatever doesn't take you more energy. Just finding something that doesn't take you more energy is the most helpful.
It's good. Thank you for sharing that. So now I'm going to wrap us up. Thank you guys for asking such great questions. Thank you, Chris, for taking the time to share everything that you shared and answer some really amazing questions. So with that, as a reminder, the Association of CNPs hosts events like this throughout the year. For more info, you can check our events page, and you can also check the chat just to find that page. And additionally, you can donate to help us to continue to keep these events free. And you will also find more information on that in the chat. And those are all the announcements that I have. And we're so glad that you all were able to join us today for this amazing webinar. We hope to see you for next week's webinar. Have a good one.